Curiosity hung in the air that morning like frost over Red Hollow. Folks gathered outside the sheriff's office, whispering, pretending not to stare as a tall man in a weathered coat stood silent by the door. Caleb Ward, the richest rancher this side of the valley, had come to make a purchase, but not of cattle, not of land. Something about that fact set the whole town buzzing. Inside, a girl stood barefoot on the wooden floor, shivering though the stove burned hot. Her name was Eliza May Carter, and her eyes, large, uncertain, the color of smoke, never lifted from the floorboards. She was barely 20, small enough to look like the wind could carry her off, yet there was something stubborn about the way she held her chin, as if survival itself had become her only language. Her father sat across from the sheriff, counting coins. 4 silver dollars. That was the price he demanded. The sheriff looked uneasy, his mustache twitching with guilt, but he said nothing. Men like him had seen too much to speak against such things. The papers were signed in silence. Caleb stood a few feet away, his gloved hands folded before him. He didn't look at the father, didn't look at the money. He looked at her. The way she stood trembling in her thin dress made something ache in him, an old pain he thought long buried. He'd come to this deal certain he was doing the right thing, that a man of means could offer safety, maybe dignity. But now, staring at her, the idea of ownership felt sickening. Still, he said nothing. His voice, when it came, was calm as the winter wind. "I'll take her home." Eliza flinched at the word home. The sheriff opened the door, and the cold burst in. Outside, people turned their faces away, pretending not to see. The sound of hooves filled the silence as Caleb helped her onto the wagon. She didn't thank him, didn't meet his eyes. He offered his coat. She refused, pressing her arms tight to her sides as if to disappear. The journey to the ranch was long and wordless. Snow fell heavier the farther they went, turning the horizon pale and endless. The horse's breath came out in white clouds. The wheels creaked under the frost. Eliza's hands were red and raw from the cold, but she made no complaint. Every so often, she glanced sideways, studying the man beside her. His face was hard, but not cruel, weathered by sun, shadowed by a sadness she couldn't name. She wanted to ask why he'd done it, why he'd spent money on someone like her, but the words stayed trapped in her throat. When the ranch finally came into view, it rose out of the white like something carved from loneliness. Wide barns, fences dusted in snow, the main house with its dim yellow lamplight. A dog barked once and then fell quiet. Martha Lou, the ranch cook, met them at the door, her apron dusted with flour, her eyes full of questions. "Lord have mercy," she murmured when she saw the girl. "You'll freeze to death out there. Come in, child." Eliza hesitated, then stepped over the threshold. The warmth hit her like a shock. Caleb followed, setting his hat on the hook. "This is Miss Carter," he said simply. "She'll be staying here." Martha Lou's brows furrowed, but she nodded. "Room's ready upstairs." Eliza trailed behind her up the creaking staircase, her fingers brushing the railing polished by years of use. The room was small but clean, a bed, a lamp, a quilt folded neatly. The window looked out over fields half buried in snow. She stood by it, silent, not sure what to do next. The sound of Caleb's boots came from the doorway. "You'll have food, warmth, and work if you want it," he said quietly. "You're not beholden to me." Her gaze flicked toward him, wary, disbelieving. "Why?" she whispered. He looked away, as though ashamed of his own decency. "Because no one else would have done it." She didn't understand. Men didn't do things without wanting something back. The thought made her chest tighten. Caleb turned to leave, then stopped. Her feet were bare, the skin cracked and bleeding from the cold. Without a word, he knelt, untying the worn laces of his gloves, then the strings of her boots. Eliza froze, heart pounding. No man had ever knelt before her. She didn't know what frightened her more, the tenderness or the unfamiliar mercy behind it. When he rose again, his eyes met hers, steady and quiet. "Rest," he said. "You're safe here." Then he left her standing there, trembling not from fear, but from the strangeness of gentleness. The next morning, she woke to sunlight spilling across the room. Martha Lou was humming downstairs. The smell of coffee drifted through the hall. Eliza, dressed in a faded dress laid out for her, and stepped outside, drawn by the sound of horses. Caleb was already in the corral, working a restless bay mare. His movements were calm, patient. When he noticed her watching, he tipped his hat slightly. She nodded back, uncertain what such a gesture meant. Days passed quietly. She learned to sweep the porch, to mend torn cloth, to feed the chickens before dawn. The silence between them became a language of its own, unspoken, fragile, yet strangely comforting. Sometimes, when she walked past him, she caught a flicker of something like apology in his eyes, and it confused her more than cruelty ever had. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the whole town was watching. When she went with Martha Lou to the general store, whispers followed her like shadows. "That's the girl Ward bought. $4, they say. Pretty thing, though." The words stung more than cold wind. That night, she sat by the window and watched the snow fall until her eyes blurred. Caleb found her there. "You'll catch your death," he murmured. "People talk," she said, barely audible. "They always will," he replied. "Let them." She turned to him then, really looked at him. The scar along his jaw, the quiet steadiness of his voice. "Do you think I'm worth that much?" she asked, voice trembling. He hesitated, then said softly, "No." Her breath caught, hurt flashing across her face, but before she could speak, he added, "You're worth 1,000 times more." Something broke open inside her then. Not pain, not joy, something in between, like thawing ice. For the first time, she smiled, faint and uncertain. He saw it and looked away quickly, as though afraid to believe it. That night, when she lay in the small bed upstairs, she realized she was no longer afraid of the walls or the silence. There was still fear, yes, but beneath it, a strange calm had begun to grow. She didn't know what would come next. But as she listened to the wind moving over the ranch, she thought that maybe, just maybe, this place could become something more than the price that brought her here. And downstairs, by the dying fire, Caleb sat alone, staring into the flames, wondering how a man who'd bought a life could somehow feel like he was the one being redeemed. Spring came slow to Red Hollow, like a shy visitor knocking at the edge of winter's door. The snow retreated in patches across the fields, revealing brown grass and the promise of green beneath. For Eliza, it was the first spring she had ever seen from a place that felt even half like home. She rose early now, her hair tied back with a strip of linen, her hands no longer trembling when she worked. The ranch had softened around her. Even the horses, once restless at her touch, came willingly when she called. Caleb watched her from a distance most days, a man still learning how to exist near gentleness without breaking it. He had given her space, time, and silence, everything the world had refused her. And in return, she had filled the ranch with something wordless but real, a warmth that reached even the corners he'd thought were long dead. Sometimes they spoke while working, their conversations short but threaded with something deep. One morning by the corral, she asked, "Do you ever tire of this life?" He wiped his brow, the sun glinting off his hair. "It's quiet," he said. "I used to think that was enough. And now—" He met her gaze, steady and searching. "Now I think quiet means something else when someone's here to share it." She looked away quickly, pretending to fix the fence, but her heart moved in her chest like a bird testing its wings. She had never known a man could speak with such care. Each word felt like a small kindness carefully placed, not to impress but to honor. As the weeks passed, the townspeople's whispers returned. Men at the saloon made crude jokes about the girl the rancher had bought. Women pitied her from behind lace curtains, whispering that kindness from a man like Caleb must have a price. The gossip drifted across the valley until even Martha Lou scowled when she heard it. "They can't stand to see good come from anything," she muttered. Caleb tried to ignore the talk, but one evening the sheriff came riding up the lane, his horse kicking dust. "You got trouble brewing," Amos warned. "Few boys been drinking, say they're gonna come test how much you paid for that girl." Caleb's expression hardened, the calm in his eyes turning to steel. "They'll find I don't bargain twice." That night, the wind rose. Eliza stood by the window, the sky streaked with lightning. "You shouldn't go out there," she said as Caleb checked the door bolts. "I won't let them near this place," he replied. "You don't have to fight for me," she said softly. "You've already done enough." He turned, his voice low and sure. "No, Eliza. Not fighting would mean letting the world stay cruel. And I've had enough of that." The words sank into her like warmth spreading through cold bones. She wanted to tell him that no one had ever stood for her before, that she didn't know what to do with such devotion. But before she could speak, the sound of shouting came from outside. 3 men staggered toward the porch, their boots crunching over gravel, their laughter mean and slurred. "Come on out, Ward," one of them hollered. "Let's see this girl you're hidin'." Caleb opened the door and stepped onto the porch, unarmed. His shadow stretched long against the lantern light. "You'll leave now," he said quietly. "Go back to town before you say something you can't take back." The men sneered. "We just want a look," one jeered. "Make sure she's worth the price." Before Caleb could answer, Eliza appeared behind him. Her hands shook, but she didn't hide. The sight of her, small but unbroken, silenced the laughter for a heartbeat. "I'm not his to show," she said, her voice firm though it trembled at the edges. "And I was never for sale. Not truly." The man closest to her shifted, uncertain, as if the ground itself had turned beneath him. Her eyes held steady, filled with something fierce and shining. "He didn't buy me," she went on. "He saved me. And if you've any decency left, you'll ride away and thank God for a woman who'd still speak kindly of men after what the world's done to her." The silence that followed was thick and absolute. Then, one by one, the men backed away, muttering. Within moments, the night swallowed them, their horses fading into the wind. Caleb turned toward her, his chest rising with a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. "Yes," she replied. "I did." She looked at him then, not with fear, but with the certainty of someone who had finally remembered her own worth. Her hand brushed his, tentative but sure. He closed his around it, rough palm against soft skin, the gesture saying everything words could not. Days turned into weeks. The town, as it always did, found new gossip to feed on. The ranch returned to its rhythm of quiet mornings and long evenings filled with work and warmth. Eliza began tending a small patch of earth behind the barn, coaxing flowers from soil still cold from winter. Caleb built her a fence to keep the wind from breaking them. One afternoon, she caught him watching her with that half-smile that always made her heart stumble. "What is it?" she asked. He shook his head, voice soft. "You've changed this place." "I just planted flowers," she said. He smiled wider. "No, Eliza. You made it live again." She blushed, turning back to her garden, but her heart felt full, steady, and free. That summer, the valley bloomed brighter than anyone could remember. The fields shimmered gold beneath the sun, and laughter returned to the house like a long-lost friend. Caleb built a new porch swing overlooking the fields, and on warm evenings, he and Eliza sat there watching the sunset burn the sky. Sometimes they spoke of the past, though only briefly. He told her about his mother who'd died too young, and she spoke of the day she'd been sold, how the world had felt empty ever since. But in those moments, their voices didn't tremble. They were no longer stories of pain, but of how far they'd come from it. One evening, as the light faded to amber, Caleb turned to her. "Eliza," he said quietly, "I'd like you to stay. Not because you owe me anything, but because I can't imagine this place without you." She smiled, tears bright in her eyes. "You don't have to ask," she whispered. "I already decided." He reached for her hand, and she let him, their fingers entwined against the fading sun. The air smelled of hay and lilacs, and the world felt still for once. Years later, folks in Red Hollow would still whisper about the rancher and the girl he'd bought for $4. But those who ever visited the ranch saw something truer: a woman tending her flowers, a man beside her, and laughter floating across the golden fields. It turned out, kindness could be the grandest rebellion of all. And love, when it finally arrived, asked for nothing but the courage to stay.